in these good markets, we need to really be looking at, okay, what can we do with this money? How can we keep it in the business? And what do we do that's not stupid?
Allan Crockett is back as our guest as we're halfway through the calendar year, and it's a good time to reevaluate and be proactive for both planning for the rest of this year as well as the future of your business.
Now is definitely not the time to be complacent. We need to be very proactive and really take an inventory of where we are today, where we think we're going to be.
From marketing to tax planning to making wise decisions with how we can invest our profits so that we can take advantage of growth opportunities when they arrive. It's your business, so let's grab a gear and take it to the next level.
Don't get lured into, lulled into some kind of carnal security because we have high prices. Let's pay attention to business.
Join us on this episode of the Working Ranch Radio Show. And we welcome you here to another edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm Justin Mills, your host. This is episode 173. I just say that mainly because, there's others. If you go to our podcast website at workingranchradio.com, you'll find all of the podcasts that we've had over the years. In addition, you can also find us on pretty much any podcast provider out there. And we appreciate you taking the time to listen in on some of the previous shows that we've had. There's always a lot of relevant information in there. I've said this before, and I'll say it again. I really do try to have shows, for the most part, that are shows that are relevant at any point in time that you might listen. Now, last week's show might be a little bit of an exception to that, but from time to time, we do need to cover some things that are extremely timely and relevant. Last week, Clint Berry joined us with Superior Livestock as we were looking at what he anticipates this market to look like through the summer months and into that fall run. A great show. Go back and listen to that. I always enjoy visiting with him as he's very, very attentive and very knowledgeable about the cattle markets. And so go back and listen to that show, in addition to all the other shows we're talking about as well. Now, before we head into our conversation today with our guest, I want to remind you that later on coming up in the show, we will hear from the captain, Tim O'Byrne, editor of Working Ranch Magazine, with this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents. And we'll also hear from meteorologist Don Day about what he anticipates the weather to look like across the country for this upcoming 4th of July weekend. Well, grab your cup of coffee, settle back, and join us for today's program. Thanks to Cowpuncher Coffee. They always keep me plenty caffeinated. I appreciate their generosity. Jim and Trish Williams. By the way, if you're looking for a new coffee brand to try out, why don't you give them a call or check them out on the internet? You can go to their website at cowpunchercoffee.com. Grab a mug. Let's spur the day with Cowpuncher Coffee. It's what we drink here at the Working Ranch Radio Show studios and at the X-Ring Ranch. Well, joining us now is a good friend of mine, Allan Crockett, who is a ranch consultant and a business coach. Allan, good to have you back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
Great to be with you again, Justin.
Well, as you and I, we had an awful long discussion before we even started here today, and I always enjoy visiting with you, not only because from your business perspective of as a consultant, as a business coach, but you also run some cattle. I know your son does some cattle work, runs cattle and on a ranch there as well. And so, you're just in it. You're immersed in it enough to know that when we talk about what we're going to be in today, it's not just some kind of an armchair, flimp-it quarterback suggestion. It's things that you're helping other folks with, and in addition in your own operations and everything of that nature. But as we set this up here today, there's a couple things in my mind. First of all, we're about halfway through the year, and for those operations that are running fiscal year January to December, it is awful easy to want to be outside getting a lot of stuff done, but we still need to be focused on some of the business things that need to be done in the office. Then we add on what you and I were talking an awful lot about is the climate that we're in terms of a business climate. Boy, we've got record high prices and moisture's kind of here and there, but it's been fairly decent. So really, when you look at it, this time of the year, it's pretty important to be in the office doing some work on the business.
Absolutely. And I think one of the real dangers we're facing today is, like you say, this market where record high prices, and it can be very easy for us to become complacent in what's going on in our business and just allow the market to do what it wants. The drought, there's still drought and certain, even extreme drought in some parts of New Mexico and Texas, but the market I mean, when we're selling cull cows for $1.40 to $1.60 plus a pound, we're getting over $2,000 for a cull cow. That is something that we have never, ever seen. And it could be easy to slip into some kind of sense of security there that's really just a facade or it's not real secure. And our memories can be really short term, but if we go back 10 years ago, 2013, 14, and 15, we saw record high prices, and all of a sudden the market went the other way, and people were paying $3,000 and $4,000 for bred heifers and selling a cull cow, that same heifer, the cull cow, a year or two later and getting $1,000. They got hit really, really hard with depreciation. And so now is not the time to become complacent. We need to be, in my world, I tell people you need to spend 2 hours a day, 2 days a week in the office. And that usually grows once we really get into doing strategic planning. But I know guys that spend 4 hours a day, 2 days a week. And if I tell them that up front, then they say there's no way they can do that. But 2 hours, 2 mornings a week, and it does need to be morning before our physical bodies get beat up out in the heat and the work all day and the long hours, and we come in and we're tired and we try to do some strategic planning. It just doesn't work. So for the most of us, there are some exceptions to that rule, but I think we just need to be very proactive and not become complacent with the market that we're in and pay attention to things. So right now, halfway through a fiscal year or calendar year is a good time to sit down and look and say, okay, here's what we projected early on, and here's where we're looking today, and what the projection look between now and the end of the year, and really take inventory of where we are. And I would include in that some tax planning. And it may be a little bit premature to really sit down with the accountant if you're on a calendar year tax years. But for sure, October, we need to be sitting down with the accountant and say, okay, here's what we have for income, here's what our expenses are, here's what we're projecting the rest of the year, where are we at? Because every dime that we give the IRS is a dime we don't get to keep in our pocket and operate on next year. And so that becomes pretty important, especially in these times of high prices.
Mm-hmm. And I want to get more into that later on in our show. We're going to talk a little bit more about some of that mindset of tax planning and just what we should be looking at and doing that. Allan, one of the things as I look at this is that I think about that when prices are high, and you can even take the same thing and say, okay, let's say in our pasture management, and when we get a lot of rain, it has a tendency to erase some mistakes, but in reality, if we're not changing management, those mistakes are still going to come forward or come out at some point. So yeah, water will help erase some of my grazing mistakes when it comes to pasture management, but I hope I learn from that. Same thing right now, when we're in high market prices, it might help us to erase maybe a bad decision we made, but we really do need to analyze the process, our business process, and our whole scheme of doing business, that we aren't going to perpetuate and that problem's going to come up later on, because it's a lot harder to pay for that problem when these markets are down.
Yeah. You mentioned the rain and grazing management. I've said many times, a good rainy season can cover up a multitude of sins. And it's the same thing, we get rain and grass grows, and we have the tendency to look out across the pasture and see all that grass waving to us and a little breeze and it's green and it's beautiful, and we forget about grazing management. And so it's the same thing we're looking at now. We have high prices and we're projecting good profits this year, and it's easy to say, okay, well, it's coming to me, it's good, everything's good, and even though we've made mistakes in business and we didn't do things quite right, this year can cover up that multitude of sins again. But eventually it's going to come to the surface if we don't change our behavior, meaning doing strategic planning and staying on top of things, that kind of behavior. If we don't change that and stick with it, or if we are doing it and we get complacent, we need to get uncomplacent. We need to be proactive, get back to the planning, stay on top of it, or it will come back and bite us in the 6 o'clock if we're not careful.
Yeah. Not to jump completely off track of our subject at hand today, but I've always kind of felt that way, and this is going to probably get into a dicey road with some folks about conservation easements. Is sometimes people get into a conservation easement because the ranch needs money, so they sell off that developmental thing, but they've not changed management. So in 15 years, we're right back where we were at. Same thing in this particular case is that, if we don't change some management, just because higher cattle prices isn't going to change when we get into those lean years, we've actually just dug the hole deeper.
Exactly. And when we start talking about over $2,000 for a cull cow that we've never seen before, we're seeing that all across the country. Those cull cows go to hamburger, and hamburger is the staple. As far as beef is concerned, that's the biggest selling cut of beef there is. It's hamburger. I mean, we buy more hamburger than we do steaks, than we do roast, even stew meat. So if we look at that $2,000 cull cow is going to have an impact on hamburger prices at the grocery store. And if that gets too out of whack, people are going to stop buying hamburger. It costs more to eat today than it did 4 years ago. It costs more to put gas in or diesel in your pickup, your family car, than it did 4 years ago. And so, and interest rates are way higher than they were 4 years ago. So we look at all of that and, all right, well, what are we going to cut out of our budget? Well, we used to eat steaks once a week. I guess we'll go to eating steaks once a month or whatever the number is. We used to eat hamburger 3 nights a week or 6 nights a week. We're going to cut that in half. We'll cut it down to once a week, and that will come back, and it will affect the producer eventually. And so those prices will come down, and then where are we if we've let it get out of hand, like you were saying?
Mm-hmm. We're going to take a break here. My guest today is Allan Crockett, ranching consultant and business coach. When we come back, we're going to dive a little deeper into being proactive in our strategic planning. We'll also be talking about marketing, and then even how do we handle the profitability. Allan's already touched on those briefly. We're going to jump into those just a little bit deeper as well when we come back. This segment today brought to you by K-Line Irrigation, a cost-effective adaptive irrigation solution designed specifically with the grass-based livestock producer in mind. Find out more by going to their website at k-linena.com.
This year, choose to unlock the full potential of your cattle operation with K-Line Irrigation, the affordable and dynamic solution for grass-based livestock operations. Beat drought by planning ahead with the most user-friendly irrigation system. K-Line systems ensure optimal water distribution across all acres and are unencumbered by obstacles such as fence lines or steep terrain. Don't miss out on untapped pasture potential. Choose K-Line to secure the future of your grazing operation. For more information, visit our website at www.k-linena.com. Be sure to fill out a consultation form so our designers can create an estimate for your project. K-Line Irrigation, for greener, more productive pastures anywhere.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. My guest today is Allan Crockett. And Allan, as we were talking here at break about what we kind of want to get into this next segment here, a good lead into that a bit, and it ties somewhat to our conversation that we had on last week's episode 172 with Clint Berry, Superior Livestock, as he was kind of giving some indication where this market was going to be. But at the very last of that conversation with him last week was, I asked him what is a concern that he had. And there was a little bit of concern with these prices continuing to go high. Where are we going to meet? Where's that consumer going to stop at and really start reducing that? And there is a little concern in that. You, in addition, as we were talking, that was the little bit of the concern you have is consumption, and where are we going to see that start to decline a little bit, or declining as it is? And it does affect us as ranchers. Yeah, we're going to have high prices, but at some point, we're going to hit that. And that's something we need to be aware of.
You're absolutely right. And supply and demand, I mean, we all know what supply and demand does in the fall when a bunch of calves hit the market. The supply is higher and the demand goes down and the price follows that. And so we're going to see the same thing on the consumer end. And if we look at that, I don't know, I was reading here a while back, I think in 1976 was kind of the high, but we were eating about 94 pounds of beef per capita in the United States. Last year or this year, I think it's projected to be around somewhere between 55 and 57 pounds of beef per capita. So down from 94 to 57. If we look at chicken on the other side of that, 1960 chicken was 28 pounds per capita. Right now it's 94. So you take the beef high, well, now the chicken is at 94. We're at somewhere 55 to 57. So chicken surpassed us here a few years ago as far as beef producers are concerned. And you're absolutely right on that. there comes a point where you go to the grocery store and with the inflation that we've seen here the last few years and the interest rates the way they are and the economy is not as robust as it used to be. And, if you're feeling the crunch and you're pushing your cart around the grocery store and you come to hamburger, or beef of any kind, and you come to that and you look at the price and you just walk on by and you go find something else to put in your grocery cart, and that's where it's going to come back and bite us. And let's enjoy these high prices, but I don't know how long they can stay up like they are, and I don't know how the consumer demand is going to change that. Obviously, we talk about per capita beef consumption, per capita chicken consumption. If we look at 1960 U.S. population, it was under 180 million, and now we're over 330 million. It hasn't quite doubled, but we're up 1.8 or 9 times since 1960. So even though the per capita consumption of beef is down, our population is up, and so it's kind of offset some of that. But you're absolutely right, as was your guest last week. There will come a breaking point where beef is too expensive for the average consumer in the grocery store to buy. And, much less if we're going to go out to dinner. Well, where are we going to go out to dinner? Are we going to a nice steakhouse? Probably not, because money's tight or tighter than it's been. So all of that inflation, everything is affects what goes on in our bottom line. We don't have control over that, but what we do have control over is what we do in our business from a strategic standpoint and a marketing standpoint that needs to be part of our strategic planning. And in the case this year, we better be doing some tax planning also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a good segue as we start looking at now. So far in our conversation, we've sort of been setting the scenario, setting the scene up here, and what we do now going forward. And so as we look at that, as you said, we do need to be proactive in our strategic management. As I was thinking about that a little bit, Allan, I remember several years ago when I lived in Billings and working with some fairly large companies there with all of their planning. And of course, I was talking with them in terms of sponsorship and advertising. And I mean, some of those large companies, they were planning 10 years out. Now that's tough. I realize as ranchers, that's tough. But it doesn't mean that we can't be planning 2, 3, 4, 5 years out, and things are going to change. And so it leads me into the question here as far as we look at strategic planning that, we're halfway through the year. Let's be looking at what these prices are going to be for fall and begin that process. And even long term, what does our business want to look like in 3 years? All of that is a good time to be doing that now, especially in an air-conditioned room.
Absolutely, because it's hot outside. So if you look at that, 10 years, and I think I mentioned this on one of our other shows, one of the other shows with you, that I used to do a lot of 5-year planning, and I just saw people weren't getting things done on a 5-year plan. It was just too far out. And so I did some research on that and stumbled across somebody else that had done the research, and scientifically it's backed that a 3-year plan is kind of optimum. 5 years is too long, 1 year is too short. So 3 years is pretty optimum, but that 3-year plan needs to be part of a longer plan. We can't just look 3 years down the road. We gotta be looking 10 years down the road, 15 years down the road, especially, somebody that's in their 60s and looking at, all right, succession planning. Is one or more of the kids going to come back, or are they already here? And if they're not coming back, what does succession planning look like? And if we're younger, you have a son that's in college, and is he coming back? Well, and what does that look like if he does? And what does the business need to look like if one of the kids is going to come back, or 2 of the kids are going to come back, and we're still going to be involved, because now all of a sudden we're feeding 2 families, 3 families, and if we're struggling to do that on a bad year or normal year, struggling to feed 1 family, how in the world are we going to feed 2 or 3 families? So we need to be planning and looking forward. So that 3-year plan, which I really feel is optimum, and that's what I teach my clients. Let's look at 3 years, but look at it as a part of a 10 or 15-year plan where we really want our business to be down the road. Mm-hmm. So I think those corporations you were working with, their corporate plans of 10 years out is spot on, but let's get real specific what the next 3 years looks like as part of that.
Mm-hmm. So part of that strategic planning that we alluded to there, you were just talking about there is like we were talking about. what do we want this to look like in about 2-3 years out. Let's jump in to one side of that, and let's look at the fiscal, the financial side of that, and planning, and the strategic planning right now that we should be looking at. And I know that kind of coincides with some of the stuff we're going to talk a little bit later regarding marketing and tax planning and those kinds of things. But when we come to the financial side of things, I think one of the things that you and I talked about before we jumped on air here today was when things are really good, it's easy to start buying some things and doing some things like that. But at the same time, we got to be a little cautious with that and looking out, okay, where this market's going to be at, and operating at a rate that we can continue to operate in 3 to 4 years when that market starts to come down.
Yeah. And even if it starts to come down next year, I mean, it could come down this year still. And that could lead us into a false sense of security today. Think, all right, well, we have really high prices. It's going to be good the rest of this year. And so it's okay if we spend some money doing some things that normally we wouldn't do or wouldn't spend that money on. Well, what happens if the market doesn't stay up and it does come down? And it will. It's just a matter of when. So I think that strategic planning, the things we need to be looking at from a financial standpoint is looking at where we are, what our month-to-month bills are, but also the notes if we have a cow note or a mortgage, or if we're looking at expansion, what that expansion looks like and when and where, and is it next door? Is it an hour away? Is it in a different state? And our son or daughter is going to go run that ranch in a different state that we found. And what does that look like? So now is definitely not the time to be complacent. We need to be very proactive and really take an inventory of where we are today, where we think we're going to be. And it's not a guess, it's a plan, but where we think the market is going to be. Maybe it's the best educated guess of where the market will be in October, November, and what that does to us. And then look at a couple of scenarios. Well, what if it's a little bit higher? What if it's a little bit lower? And where does that put us? And then, as you alluded to already, we've got to be looking down the road, 3 and 4 and 5 years, because if this cattle cycle, historically we've seen kind of an 8 to 10 year cycle, highs to lows. If we're at a high, well, that means in 4 or 5 years we're going to be at a low. And if we set our business up so that it operates based on today's prices, what does that do to us in 3 or 4 or 5 years? It hurts really bad. So we need to be looking at that. If we're looking at retirement, I had a couple in my office 2 weeks ago that are looking at retirement, and I mean, what a better time to sell cows? Mm-hmm. If you're going to liquidate your cow herd, what a better time to do that than when prices are at record highs. But then we have to look at the tax planning side of it too, because we've worked hard all our lives. We don't want to just give that money away, and now we don't have anything. So we're looking at some things with them of putting some cattle with other people, and it'll be passive income for them, and they mitigate the tax liability, by reinvesting in cattle, livestock, and then it turns into passive income, so they're not having to work 10, 12, 15-hour days and can travel and enjoy life while they're still healthy enough and young enough to be able to do some things they want to do.
Yeah. We're going to take another break here. My guest is Allan Crockett. When we come back, we're going to get a little deeper into looking at being proactive in our marketing as well as proactive in our tax planning. This segment today brought to you by the American Gelbvieh Association. Make your crossbreeding count with Gelbvieh and Balancer Genetics. To find out more, go to their website at gelbvieh.org.
Capitalize on crossbreeding with Gelbvieh and Balancer bulls. Raise replacement females with added fertility, increased longevity, and greater productivity. Gelbvieh and Balancer influenced females wean more pounds of calf per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer influenced cattle offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and have excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. Make your crossbreeding count with Gelbvieh and Balancer Genetics.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. Allan Crockett is our guest here today, ranching consultant and business coach. And we're just generally talking about fiscal year, halfway through the fiscal year for a lot of folks. I know other people might be on different quarters when their fiscal year comes, but for probably a lot of operations, January to December is the normal year. And with that in mind, how do we just take in everything that's going on, the market, and how we need to be moving forward and just being proactive in our planning and managing that? It's even in good years. It's, Allan, I think one of the things, really the key point, I circled this on my own notes, is the key point, even in good years, it's even more important in good years that we do this than in the bad years. I know the bad years when we really know we need to, it's just like going to church. A lot of guys end up at church when things are really tough, but maybe go to church when times are good too.
I think so. I think that's one of those things that I had a guy tell me several years ago, his daughter had gone off to college, and he says, the only time I hear from my daughter is when she needs money. He says, I'm beginning to understand how God feels now. We only talk to him when we have a problem.
So, yeah, in this analogy, I mean, our planning and what we're doing and how we're handling the profitability in our operations that I'm assuming most outfits are going to have. Years ago, is kind of a joke was it's easy to be a rancher when it's raining and cattle prices are up.
Yeah, and we're looking at good moisture in a lot of the country right now, and even where I live in Arizona, the monsoon hasn't officially according to National Weather Service, it's kicked off, but it's a little bit early to really start seeing good rains, and we're starting to see some. So we're not in extreme drought, but we're drier than normal. So if that turns around, that changes things. And then high market, I mean, fat calves and high market just make you smile ear to ear. Mm-hmm. But at the same time, we need to pay attention to that. And, metaphorically not get caught with our pants down that, hey, we had a really good year all the way around, and now we owe a whole bunch of money in taxes. So doing some planning now and looking at the market and doing that is where we are today and where we want our business to be, 10 years out, and what does it look like the next 3 years, and how do we take some of this extra cash that we're projecting we're going to get this year. How do we take that and make sure we keep it in our business? Is now the time to grow our business? Well, maybe not because of these cow prices being so high. But if we don't do something, then we may lose some of that opportunity because of taxes. And if we pay the tax, then the money leaves our business and we don't have it to do anything with either. So part of that, and as we look at overall profitability of a business year in and year out, I had a client call me a few years ago and said for the first time ever, they had they paid off their operating note pretty much every year, but then we did some things, and through some strategic planning and some of the things that happened, she told me, she said, this is the first time in 40 years that we haven't jumped right back into our operating note in January. Mm-hmm. Because I look at what we have in the bank right now and what our monthly expenses are. And she says, we won't dip into our operating note until at least April and maybe the end of April. And really, when we look at, strategic planning, if we're running our business right, we ought to, on an average year, it ought to be later this year that we get into our operating note than it was last year. We should be pushing that thing further and further down the road until maybe we get to the point where we're operating on our own money, with the exception of a really bad drought year and a low market year, a low price year that we might have to do something, or we're expanding our business, we're growing our business. And if we're at the point that we're growing a business, we've leased another ranch, or we're bringing a son or a daughter into the business, or just from our own opportunities, there's a place to lease and we wanted it. It ties in really well with our operation, geographically or whatever. And so maybe there's some expansion going on that would cause us to have to dip into that operating note a little bit earlier. But if we are truly business people, businessmen and businesswomen, we ought to be able to push that note further and further down the road and not have to just dive right back into it in January. Paid it off in December, and here we go again in January, mm-hmm. especially now that interest rates have climbed on us, because that's just, we get the tax write-off for the interest rates, but it's still money that's not in our business. Whether you pay it to the bank or pay it to the IRS, it's gone from your business and you don't get to keep it and operate on it next year. So I think, in these good markets, we need to really be looking at, okay, what can we do with this money? How can we keep it in the business? And what do we do that's not stupid? Because we've all bought equipment or vehicles or knew this or knew that we always wanted in a good year, and maybe we finance part of that and took accelerated depreciation on it, and then we're making payments and, oh gosh, well, it's going to be tight this year. And we look back, well, that was really stupid. And so we need to be careful that we don't make stupid decisions and that we just look at things rationally, where we are and where we see things going and what we want our business to accomplish, and make good business decisions that are sound.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that was really kind of one of the bases. I know I mentioned a bit ago that one of the key points is now more than ever is a time to be really thinking about strategic planning and our planning in our operation. But as I told you before we started our interview here today, what's been weighing on my mind with the profitability in our industry is that I don't do something stupid. And that was, that was kind of the point of our conversation here today. I want to jump, Allan, into maybe a micro part of this strategic planning or this planning in this time of the year. And let's talk marketing just a little bit here, because that also jives a little bit with the conversation we're having here today. I know some of that's more finite than looking 10 years out sort of a thing, but we can sure be looking 6 months, 18 months out in some of this. And maybe just the marketing aspect in terms of what is our herd size going to look like? What are we going to carry over? What class of cow are we going to try to keep or get rid of? And I realize some of that drought and hay and those kinds of things can affect some of that. But at the same time, looking at the marketing element might be something to be considering right now as well, especially as it's going to go hand in hand with some of the tax planning we're going to talk about here in a bit.
Absolutely, Justin. We really need to be looking at that, because, you can look at, if you're a cow-calf producer, which a lot of the people listening to this radio show are, if you're a cow-calf producer, this year might be a really good year to get rid of some of those older cows that are starting to get a little bit thin and they still have some condition, but not maybe as good as they were carrying a year or two ago. Or, the bottle teat cows, big bags, those kinds of cows, if they're still in the herd, this might be the year to hey, we need to turn loose some of these. And then the question comes up is, okay, what are we going to replace that cow with? And, we're going to keep some extra heifers this year because that cow could be bred, or, and we just sell her to get her out of there because of the way the market is. So do we keep more replacement heifers this year, or do we keep all of our replacement heifers this year? Maybe expose them all to a bull. And, what do you think the market's going to be next year? Could you sell a bred heifer next year if you had more than you needed? And I don't know the answer to that, but I think those are the questions, the kinds of questions we ought to be asking ourselves is, what is the shape of our cow herd today? Where do we want it to be long-term and even short-term? The next 2 to 3 years, what can we do right now with some extra cash to take that herd, the direction we want it to go, and maybe get rid of some animals that we've been holding on to. Now might be the time to do that. Again, not doing stupid things, but maybe selling something today and maybe even buying something back that doesn't have to be on your place. That, again, maybe somebody else has some extra grass or extra feed, or maybe it's even putting some cattle in the feedlot that maybe we don't normally do that, but maybe we're going to do that. And maybe they're cattle we own today, and maybe they're cattle we buy before the end of the year and do that with. I don't know. But I think we look at that as part of our overall financial plan, again, with the intent of keeping as many dollars in our business as we can without doing stupid things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. We don't know what we have if we don't know what we have.
Yeah.
Well, let's take another break here. My guest is Allan Crockett, and when we come back, we're going to be in our final conversation or segment with Allan. We're going to talk more then about some of the tax planning and some of that as we kind of wrap and tie out a lot of this together. It's a good time of the year to be doing that from a ranching operation. We'll continue on when we come back here on the Working Ranch Radio Show.
This year, choose to unlock the full potential of your cattle operation with K-Line Irrigation, the affordable and dynamic solution for grass-based livestock operations. Beat drought by planning ahead with the most user-friendly irrigation system. K-Line systems ensure optimal water distribution across all acres and are unencumbered by obstacles such as fence lines or steep terrain. Don't miss out on untapped pasture potential. Choose K-Line to secure the future of your grazing operation. For more information, visit our website at www.k-linena.com. Be sure to fill out a consultation form so our designers can create an estimate for your project. K-Line Irrigation, for greener, more productive pastures anywhere.
Welcome back to the Working Ranch Radio Show. My guest today is Allan Crockett. And Allan, as we basically tie a lot of our conversation up here today. Earlier, I'd said that so much of what we're talking about is so intertwined with each other, as we were talking about strategic planning in our business to marketing. And now as we get into talking about how do we handle some of this profitability in a smart way. It is a good time of the year. We've already alluded to that at different times, to be knowing where we're going to end out at the end of the year, because one of the things that can happen, and one of the stupid things that we were talking about in the last segment, is in order to avoid taxes, we start doing things. And it could potentially put us in a position in 3 to 4 years where we're just reeling to try to make it all come together, because we've elevated our cost of running and all of the things that we do. And now we're trying to take a 40% drop in a market and make those same payments the cost of running a business. And so all of that comes back and swings back to now is just tax planning and handling that profitability.
Yeah. And it's interesting because we keep talking about, the calendar year, but I have clients who, the fiscal year ends the end of September. So they're 3/4 of the way through their fiscal year. And by all means, really need to be looking at where things are at right now. So yeah, there's a lot of things that people have done in the past and we can still do. Prepaying some expenses going into next year, at the end of this year, whether that's fuel, whether it's feed, whatever it might happen to be, or even if you sell calves or cows, having the buyer of those wait and pay you next year. A lot of sell barns, and even the online, the video sales, they'll put that money in an escrow account and give it to you next year so that it kicks that can a little further down the road, which if it was always these kind of markets, that's all we're doing is kicking the can down the road. But we know the market will come back down. And so if we can postpone some of the income this year till next year, that can alleviate the strain this year of a tax burden. And next year, maybe we won't have that tax burden. Again, looking at expansion, but very cautiously in high prices. Bankers are stereotypically, they like to lend money to producers to expand when the price is high. Look at this market. These prices are high. Let's expand. And that's really the opposite of what we ought to be doing. We ought to be expanding in low markets when the prices are low. But too often we don't have the extra cash in a low market. We have it when the market is high. And so then we want to expand, and we do that, and we buy high-priced animals or something along that line. So even maybe, keeping all your heifers this year and breeding them, and then picking out your bred heifers from the breds, and then selling the rest of them as either bred heifers or feeder heifers next year. If you think the market's going to tank between now and this time next year, maybe you wouldn't want to do that. But just some thought process going into that. And I think that the strategic plan, the big key to that is the thought process.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to stress, one of the things you and I had talked about is, talk to your accountant, really. I mean, this is a time as we start looking into this, is to have that conversation. We're offering conversation between you and I about some things, but, visit with your accountant. Do that.
Absolutely. And the other player that is key in this is visit with your banker. And let your banker know what your plans are. Hey, we're looking at expansion, or we're looking at this, or whatever. And let your banker, let them be part of this plan, at least maybe not part of the planning, but at least know what your plan is so that they can plan accordingly, and that they understand why you're doing what you're doing that may be a little bit counterintuitive to them, that, we're not selling all our capital. Well, what are you, crazy? These markets are record high and you're not selling? Well, we're holding some over till next year, or we're expanding our herd right now. We're keeping replacement heifers, or no, we are selling everything and we're not keeping anything. I don't know what that is, but if you don't give it the thought process, then you're shooting yourself in the foot.
Mm-hmm. Allan, we got just a short time here to wrap up our conversation, and I thought it would be good to kind of revisit something that you just said. I had written in my notes here a bit, cash is king with an exclamation point. And just a bit ago, you talked about expanding in a low market. Earlier, I talked about one of the things that, we're really trying to get into here on this is the key point is now more than ever in our strategic planning this time of the year. I'm going to tie all those together, because if there's any motivation in what we're talking about of why you would move forward and why you would do some of this kind of stuff that you and I are talking about here today, is for some of us there's a desire that, yeah, we want to grow. We want to expand our business operation and try to see what we can do there. And the best time to do that, as you had said, is in a low market. And the only way you're going to have that ability to expand in a low market is if you have cash, which is, back to my point, cash is king. So I want your thoughts on that.
Yes, absolutely. And so in a high market, what do we do with that cash so that we still have it in a low market so that we can expand there? And to me, we're talking about a high market, and in any market, invariably, there's going to be opportunities. There's always undervalued cattle. There's always overvalued cattle. And even within not just classes of cattle, but even different classes of livestock. I've got a friend that's running sheep and never run sheep in his life. He's running sheep right now because he says one lamb crop is going to pay for my youth. And he says, if I buy a $1,500 steer and it dies, and some of them will, that's $1,500 just lost. And so I think some of that strategic planning is looking at different classes of livestock and even different classes within the cattle business. If we do choose to sell this year, whatever it is we sell, when we sell all our calves and we have a tax liability, well, where can we invest some of that money in livestock today that is undervalued, that will reap a reward for us in the future? And I think those are some of the things we ought to be looking at in our marketing, and that strategic plan on that marketing is, again, keeping money in the business, but we're going to have to think different than we've thought in the past about this. And we're going to have to do some things that maybe we haven't done in the past, like owning sheep. We've never owned sheep before. Or, I've got some steers out with somebody and I've never done that before. Mm-hmm. But if we're looking at that now at the end of June, rather in December, we have a lot more time to find that somebody that, number one, is honest. Number two, is capable of taking outside cattle and doing a good job with them. They're competent, okay? Because honesty and competency are two different things. If somebody's going to take care of cattle for us, we want both of those things. We want them to be honest, number one. We don't want to have cattle missing that nobody knows where they went to except for the person that took them, Mm-hmm. So we want honesty there, but we want competency also. If we say, all right, we're going to, the undervalued animal today is a 3-weight steer, and we want somebody that knows how to take a 3-weight cell barn steer and keep it alive. So competency that way is hugely important. So if we start looking at, okay, there's some opportunities out there. Well, what are the opportunities? Where are they? And who are they with? Because sometimes we just focus on our own ranch and our own cows that we have and the way we've done stuff for years and years and years. So right now I'm involved with a couple of guys, and we are looking for grass. We're looking for grass because we see that there's some opportunity. We're also not near as hard, but we're also looking for some investors that want to be passive investors in the cattle business with us. And so as we look at those kinds of things, we would not be looking at that if we didn't think there were opportunities out there today. And so again, that's thinking beyond, okay, here's my cows, this is my cow-calf operation, this is what we've always done. We got to think outside of that box and look at a bigger picture. And especially if we're looking at growing a business, it doesn't have to be right next door to us. It doesn't have to be in the same state. As long as we have honest, competent people that we're working with, what are the opportunities? Identify them, identify where they are, what class of livestock it is, and then who they're going to be with. Mm-hmm. And broaden our horizons a little bit in the way we look for things. So just some thoughts there.
Yeah. Well, Allan, I want to give you just a final word here, just a couple seconds here to maybe just some final comments as we tail out of our conversation here today.
Yeah, be proactive. That's got to be number one. We need to be proactive. Don't get lured into, lulled into some kind of carnal security because we have high prices. Let's pay attention to business. Let's be proactive. Let's figure out what we can do with some of the profit we make this year to keep it in the business. And that involves strategic planning. And as I mentioned earlier in the show, 2 mornings, 2 hours a week, 2 hours each morning. If it turns into 3 or 4, great. But a minimum of 2 days a week, 2 hours of uninterrupted time. And when I say uninterrupted, that means I shut my cell phone off. I shut my emails off. I don't get any notifications. If I need to be on the computer, for me, when I'm doing my planning, I find a pen and a pad of paper is the best, and have everything else shut off. And if I need to pull something up, well, what do I think this expense or this price is going to be? make sure that all the other apps are closed so I don't get sidetracked and become distracted. Distraction will lead to no traction at all. And then, we lose traction like we're spinning our wheels in the mud or snow or an ice thing that's hard to think about this time of year. But then we don't make any progress. So make progress, be proactive, take the time to do the strategic planning. And if you need help, by all means, reach out to somebody that can help you, whether that's me or somebody else. Find the person that is the right fit. And I'm the first to recognize I'm not the right fit for everybody out there. There's people that would be well better served, working with somebody besides me. But if you're looking at strategic planning and you want somebody that owns cows and owns steers and is part of the business and recognizes what drought does and what good grazing does and what good strategic planning can do for you, well, reach out and we can have a conversation and see if it's a good fit to work together. If it's not, then find somebody else.
Mm-hmm. Well, Allan, again, I've always enjoyed the conversation with you. Thanks for joining us here today on the program.
My pleasure, Justin. Really good to visit with you.
You bet. And again, Allan Crockett has been our guest here today, a good friend of mine now for several years, has been a ranch consultant, a business coach now for many years on top of that. And I always appreciate his take on this type of a subject, this type of a program that we have here today. It's kind of underlies really one of my motivations of doing this particular show is helping push people into a mindset of thinking about your ranching operations from a business perspective. And it's always important to be proactive, and as Allan kind of alluded to here today on several different occasions. So if you do want to reach out to Allan, I will leave contact information in the show notes and the description as well, that you can find him there. And like he said, also, if it's not him, reach out to somebody if you have questions that might provide some guidance to you as you work to be strategic in the planning of your ranching operation. Stay with us. We're going to take a break. When we come back, the Captain Tim O'Byrne, editor of Workin' Ranch Magazine, will be in with this week's edition of Tim's 2 Cents, and we'll hear from meteorologist Dawn Day with a look at our long-term weather.
Looking for the perfect gift for a gardener or weather enthusiast? Introducing the Tropo, a precision rain gauge that has revolutionized both reliability and convenience. Expertly engineered by meteorologists, the Tropo gauge boasts rugged durability, impeccable accuracy, and precision to the 100th of an inch. Visit measurerain.com to order a Tropo today and use code RAINDAY. That's RAINDAY for free shipping and 10% off. Go to measurerain.com.
Hey, Justin. Hey, everybody out there in Workin' Ranch Radio Land. Just checking out the summer issue, page 50, the Rancher's Journal. This issue, Dr. Haley Brethauer wrote it. She's a veterinarian. I'll just kind of read a little bit about it. Welcome to MC Cattle Company and Veterinary Service. We are located in the north central Nebraska Sandhills. My husband Mitch and I are raising sixth-generation ranchers on the family ranch. I am a veterinarian who left mixed animal practice back in 2015 to set up a cattle-only clinic of my own here on the ranch. I love being able to combine being a vet and helping on the ranch when they need me. Our boys Charlie, 7, and Emmett, 5, are very involved, and they are looking forward to summer break so they can be around more. I just think that's a great. You need to read this because she's got a great idea, kind of a cattle-only vet, got a clinic there, beautiful photographs of their operation, everything. Page 50, Workin' Ranch Magazine, summer issue, Rancher's Journal. Check it out. Back to you, Justin.
All right, thanks, Captain. Yeah, every issue, as always, is packed full of a lot of great information, great stories, pictures, everything there. And I know he's not gonna toot his own horn on this, but the Captain also has the section in there entitled "That's an Improvement" you can catch in the latest issue, starting on page 22. That's always helpful. Just kind of some quick information there that's helpful for a lot of us in the ranching industry as well. Well, as we turn now and take a look at our long-term weather, joining us is meteorologist Dawn Day. You are on the road here today in Montrose, Colorado, and as we were joking before we went on air, it rained there this morning. I know you're at a conference, so it's always nice to go into a conference where it rains ahead of you.
Well, that's right. When the weatherman shows up at a conference and it rains, you take immediate credit for it.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about where we have seen some changes when we look at the drought monitor. Not a huge change week over week. However, we did see some moisture falling in some areas that were definitely needed.
Yeah, the desert Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico, parts of Colorado, parts of Wyoming got some rain that really needed it, need more in a lot of those areas, especially the desert Southwest. And they've got some more good chances. So the desert Southwest, the Southern Rockies are benefiting from some Gulf of Mexico moisture coming into those areas. Now, unfortunately, some of that deeper Gulf of Mexico moisture, coming up out of the Southwest United States has also concentrated some very heavy rains. And so we've had across Minnesota, parts of South Dakota, parts of Iowa, eastern Nebraska, a lot of flooding. There's been some areas that had over 10 to 12 inches of rain in the last week. They're going to be seeing a little bit more. So that's a bit of an area of concern. Of course, on the flip side of that, a year ago at this time, there was a lot of concern about the Mississippi and Missouri water levels being very low for shipping and commerce. Of course, all of this is going downstream and helping those river levels.
Yeah, definitely a difference from a year ago on that. As we look ahead, as you and I were talking before we went on air here, we are definitely in our summer pattern of highs and lows back and forth. So as we move into the 4th of July, definitely going to be a little bit cooler in my neck of the woods. Other areas, maybe not so much. But as we look more into the middle or first part of July, what are you anticipating to see across the country?
Well, as we go into the 4th of July period, what is going to happen is, as you mentioned, the northern tier of the U.S. is actually going to maybe see temperatures slightly below average as we head into the 4th of July holiday and the weekend, as Pacific fronts will traverse out of southern Canada across the northern U.S. So that'll put kind of a lid on getting it too hot up into the northern half of the U.S. where it is going to bake. And it will be baking, is the South Central. We're going to have some very hot weather in Texas, Oklahoma, maybe parts of Kansas. There's kind of a bullseye of where the heat is going to concentrate itself. And it's going to be in those areas over the next 7 to 10 days. So they need to be ready for some heat. Now, occasionally there may be some thunderstorm activity coming up out of the Southwest United States. It'll break that heat up a little bit. But that's one area of the U.S. where you can say it'll be hot as a firecracker.
Okay. All right. Well, Don, I know you're on the road and you're busy, so we'll cut her short for a little bit this week. Appreciate you joining us and giving us an update of what we anticipate here coming up.
Thanks for having me.
And you can catch meteorologist Don Day each and every morning through his daily video podcast at dayweather.com or his YouTube channel as well. Also, if you're looking for weather gauges, weather instruments, things like that, check out his website at dayweather.com.
Capitalize on crossbreeding with Gelb and Balancer bulls. Raise replacement females with added fertility, increased longevity, and greater productivity. Gelb and Balancer influenced females wean more pounds of calf per cow exposed. In the feed yard, Balancer influenced cattle offer increased performance, improved feed efficiency, and had excellent carcass merit. Balancers add the pounds, make the grade, and deliver the value. Make your crossbreeding count with Gelb and Balancer genetics.
What if your commercial beef herd could be better than you thought possible? Genetic testing can help give you more confidence about what your herd is made of, and more importantly, what it can be. Inherit Select from Zoetis provides data-driven genetic insights to help you make more informed selection, breeding, and culling decisions about your cows and heifers. The journey from genetic potential to reality begins with Inherit Select. Ask a genetics rep how to save on testing with our whole herd promotion. Go to beefgenetics.com/radio.
Well, as we take time this week to celebrate our independence as a country, may we never lose sight or forget all of the sacrifices made for the independence and the freedoms that we have. We are truly thankful to all the men and women that have served and are currently serving for our country. On behalf of all of us here at the Working Ranch Radio Show, we wish you, your family, and all your friends a very safe and happy Independence Day. I know for our family, we're going to be headed to Belfouche, South Dakota to take in the festivities there. Be sure to tune in next week for another edition of the Working Ranch Radio Show. I'm your host, Justin Mills, and until next time, keep your chin down and your mind in the middle. So long.